Today, I'm going to talk about startup engineering team and stress, and how do I distress the startup engineering team. A little bit about myself. So I graduated from University of Waterloo, electrical and computer engineering in 2013. Started my career as a software engineer at IBM. Was a very successful career, I would say. I rode the entire wave of IBM, trying to migrating from on-prem business solution provider to the cloud provider. So I learned a lot of the cloud-related technologies, such as Kubernetes, Docker, during their infancy, during these technologies at its infancy, and now they're just pretty much the de facto standard of cloud stacks. And left IBM during COVID, joined Facebook. I was probably Facebook's first full-time remote Canadian employee, working fully remotely from Canada. And I was leading a team to work on their risk management, their data classification infrastructures, and an organization called the Facebook Enterprise Trust. And well, this year I found a new job, which is the VP of Engineering at Penfield.AI. And I would say I've been fortunate enough to have encountered many stressful situations in all the experiences that I have listed above. And of course, last but not least, is I'm a father of two, which just make your job extra stressful and extra intense from time to time, but definitely more rewarding, I would say. So talk about Penfield.AI first, and I will tie up why this is sort of related to the talk I'm giving today. So Penfield.AI, we are a Toronto startup working on machine learning solutions to enhance human-machine intelligence for security analysts at security operations centers to improve their productivity and reduce their stress. So one of the questions I always ask myself and my team is, how can we build a product to distress our end users? If we're ourselves is a very stressful team, this is not going to bode well for our product success. So first of all, we are trying to build a high-performing team that are not going to burn out our engineers first, that are not super stressful. And then we have to understand stress very clear before we can creating some product or solutions to solve the problem of stress in the workplace. So this is pretty much our journey of how to reduce stress at Penfield. And just to start with, if anyone asks me, what does engineering team look like in a startup environment? I would say this is a pretty good meme to sum it up. You started with a lot of motivation. You're very motivated when you first, on your day one of joining a startup. And maybe after 4 months, after 6 months, the burnout starts to show up. You're having lots of meetings, you're working overtime, and it's really like a pressure cook sometimes. You just feel, you want to find any opportunity just to let the stress out, let those gas out. And the talk I'm going to, any mitigation techniques I'm going to talk about today is really not going to take the stress away. That will be a lie. We're not going to build a team without any sort of stress. But the trick is you want to have those valves to control the gas. So you don't want the stress to build up inside the pod, and suddenly things will blow up. That's not the outcome we want. So we want to control those stress, making sure they are at a acceptable level, and still making sure the team is performing at a very high bar. And first, before even resolving stress, we have to understand the stress. If we think stress as a function, it's made up of constants and variables. And in this talk, we're going to talk about what are those constants, what are those variables, and exactly what problems we're trying to solve. So constants are pretty much, I would say, they are the stress that exists for pretty much all startups and or engineering teams. Some examples are, you're always trying to build a product with a very aggressive timeline, while you're probably lacking, certain processes, certain infrastructures and tools. So these are definitely just some stress that are applicable to all startups. And just like Benjamin Franklin once said, to certainty in life, it's death and tax. To certainty in software development, it's going to be bugs and outages. It doesn't matter where you are, you're going to face those all the time. And of course, like for startups or for any established companies, like the VC market and microeconomics are just factors you're not going to ignore, and you cannot control it. We all know, like the stock market is not doing so well for most of the tech companies right now, and that's not just something you can control. So what you can do as an engineering leader is really acknowledge these challenges to the whole team. Be frank, be open. You don't want anyone to think that these sort of stress only apply to themselves. That's wrong. And I guess also when you hire new talents, when you're trying to hire new engineers, you have to be very frank about these kind of stress they are going to face before even joining the team. So you're getting the right talents into the team, and you're not going to be suffer turnovers because of team, one of your teammates just cannot cope these sort of constant stress, I would say. And for some of those, you can actually solve by long-term vision, like lack of process, lack of infrastructures, or bugs and outages. You can have some long-term strategies to mitigate them, to reduce them. They're not going away, but they can definitely get better and better after each iteration. So these are constant stress. You cannot, for engineering leaders, there's really not much you can do. You can probably improve them a little bit by little bit in the long term, but you cannot have a short-term win or a quick win. So what's more interesting are the variables. They are those stress that are either controllable or avoidable or mitigatable. And sometimes they're team specific. So what applies to Penfield probably doesn't apply to some teams out there. But our approach to solving stress problem is something can be applied everywhere. That's how I believe it. That's why I'm sharing this to the greater audience today. And these are the stress that can probably go away with some quick wins, with some like very simple techniques. You can just get rid of them. So here are some team-specific stress at Penfield.AI when I first started. So first is the fragmented focus time. So our calendars are being chopped in multiple pieces, where everyone is only probably having a couple of hours of focus time at most. Meeting going over time. Oh, it's been crazy when I first started, and it's not fun, to be honest. There are too many dependencies. So the first three you can see, like, all these stress are time related, and the technique is really just the developers, the engineers are asking for more time to develop their features. And the last but not least is the emotions. That's a big one I'm going to talk about later. So fragmented focus time. I guess I'll do a quick survey. There are two calendars on this screen. So if you think you prefer the left one, maybe just type left in the chat. If you prefer the right one, just type right in the chat. I'll give like maybe 10 seconds. All right. So let me tell you, there are exactly 25 meetings in both calendars, but the right one definitely has more focus time. If you look at Monday and Tuesday, there's just as much more focus time compared to the left one. And this is exactly the calendar your engineer wants to have to maximize their efficiencies and productivities. Why? Because solving hard problem is time consuming. They have to read a lot of code, they have to do a lot of data analysis, and sometimes it's probably not very reasonable to get it done within an hour or maybe even 2 hours. So you want to give them at least 4 to 5 4-hour focus time throughout the week for your engineers to really tackle hard problems. And that comes down to, how do we do this? So first of all, I would say you want to choose the right communication medium to do inter-team or intra-team communications. And I would say use async communication as much as possible, because a lot of people has the tendency of, whenever they want to get something done or whenever they want to have some answers, they want to just direct message their peers. And that will unfortunately interrupt their thought process, interrupt their workflows. So if your answer can wait, maybe just wait for 2 hours or 3 hours, use emails or use group chat, this sort of async communications, so that when your peers finish their work or finish their meetings, they will get back to you. And there, of course, there's a lot of trust needs to be placed in team for using async communications, because you want to making sure that a response is always guaranteed within a reasonable period of time. But definitely, like, my advice is, if it's not super urgent, use async communication instead of direct communications. And 2 is about, you want to be considerate when scheduling a meeting. So definitely avoid fragmenting the calendar like the left one I just showed. A good advice would be, for example, if someone already has a meeting scheduled from 2 o'clock to 2:30, and you want to schedule this meeting with this person, maybe just schedule one immediately after 2:30 or right before his first meeting at 2 o'clock. So you're going to create more focused time block for your peers. And if your peers, let's say if their entire afternoon is booked and their morning is empty, try to grab a time as early as possible or as late as possible, so that they have more time, more focused time in the morning to do their work. The worst thing that can happen is you see someone's calendar is fully open and you just schedule a meeting right around like 10 o'clock to cut their morning in half. This is something we definitely try to avoid at Penfield, at all cost. And definitely set up a no meeting day if it hasn't been done so already. This has been helpful. It just creates a 2 4-hour focus time in the week just by default. And you also want to be a little bit strategical about what day you want to set your no meetings day to, because if you set on Monday or Friday, you're sort of just creating long weekends for a team, which is not something you want, especially as a startup. Of course, for more established companies, they're having a discussion about 4-day working week. But for startups, you still want to beat the time to release your product. So you probably want to avoid long weekends. And Wednesday and Thursdays, they are sort of already mid or late into the week, and people will get desperate to get things done before the weekend. So that means if you're having your no meeting day on Wednesday or Thursday, people will break the rules, just to get something done before the end of the week. So Tuesday is actually a very good candidate. It's very logical because it's early in the week. It's not that urgent. If something needs to be done, it can be wait till Wednesday and Thursday to deal with. So Tuesday is actually a very good candidate for no meeting day if you're consider setting, a no meeting day up for your team. And another benefit about no meeting day is that you can see it as a reserve for any sort of emergency meetings, because everyone's calendar is free, it's open on that day. during the crisis, you actually want, assemble the team, assemble your entire engineering team to talk about something serious, to talk about something urgent. Tuesday is a day where everyone's calendar is open. So that's just a side benefit of having a no meeting day. Meeting over overtime. Oh, this is something I just hate so much. Like both pre-COVID and post-COVID. Pre-COVID, you're always trying to knock on the windows to kick your coworker out if their meeting is going to overtime. And for post-COVID, you're like the only one who's sitting in the Zoom's waiting room, and it's not fun if your peers are not showing up after 10 minutes. And it doesn't stop there. Like it's a domino effect, essentially. If one of your meetings is late, it's going to affect all your subsequent meetings, and it's going to making everyone more anxious because they are trying to finish the meeting within maybe 20 minutes instead of 30 minutes. And it's just creating a very stressful, I would say, workplace situation. So how do we avoid meeting going overtime? I think first advice is definitely having an agenda and sticks to it. Like you want to give the meeting an agenda. Like definitely spend 5 minutes writing what you want to achieve for this meeting in a meeting invite. And if you're thinking you're sort of the team is derailing the agenda, bring your team back to it. And you want to invite the right audience as well, because a lot of times what I see is that meeting going over time is because we're inviting some audience who shouldn't be even belong to the meeting. They ask a lot of questions to catch up on the context, to catch up on the background. And probably you spend 10 minutes explaining all of that. They are not the right person. They still don't have the solution for this. So definitely making sure that, at least for the required attendees, they are absolutely the bare minimum of people to solve this problem. You don't want to invite people who don't have enough background, who don't have enough knowledge into the meeting for specific topics. That's gonna waste so much time on this. And definitely try to avoid problem solving with a large audience. If you have a very tricky problem, a very hard problem, definitely don't invite 10 people to try to solve that. Like everyone chime in for 5 minutes, you're having a 50-minute meeting. So for hard problems, I will only invite at most 4 people into the meeting. And be comfortable about reaching agreements before or after the meeting, because a lot of times, decisions are probably very hard. It's going to be hard to reach a consensus within the team members. So you might want to find your allies even before the meeting, so you have more support when you're trying to push some agenda. And sometimes when the meeting ends, you still haven't reached a consensus, and so be it. You have to be comfortable about it, and you have to be more strategical about how do you approach next. Like you can schedule follow-up meetings, you can talk to key stakeholders who's opposing your ideas offline, but definitely just don't drag the meeting, because you don't really need to reach a consensus on the spot. That's not really, at least from the trade-off we're talking about, it's not worth it. And now it's dependencies. So dependencies is something I really don't like. It slows things down for sure. For example, if you're trying to build a service, you have one developer building the main feature, you have a second developer is building the monitoring part, and then you have a third developer building the test automations. So if you're dividing your work like that, you're creating a dependency. And the dependency will create a lot of meetings for knowledge transfer, for data sync up, and sometimes it can slow the entire project down by weeks. So I think my my belief is that if we can have end-to-end ownership, then we should enable or empower end-to-end ownership. That means we usually have a developer who's working on this feature to be responsible for the feature development, be responsible for the test development as well as monitoring development, and he should be responsible for the ops and releases as well. So that's just something can speed up the development process by a lot. And in case if dependency is not avoidable, because that's actually true for in many cases, if dependency is not avoidable, definitely sync often. And this is sort of why you don't want to create unnecessary dependencies in the first place, because if there's a dependency, you need to sync often and you need to have more meetings. So my advice is definitely, try to avoid artificial dependencies or unnecessary dependencies. And lastly is really about emotions. I hope everyone knows this guy, emotional damage. I think more importantly, it's about we want to avoid negative emotions because they are very toxic in the workplace and it brings a lot of stress to individuals. If possible, you definitely want to replace emotions with process. Like that's why you always hear people saying like blame the process, not the people. You want to use facts and numbers, because at the startup you're going to hear a lot. Something is, it's do or die, it's critical to the company, or something it's just impossible to do. The timeline is too aggressive. You're going to hear this sort of statements with escalation marks a lot. And in this case, you definitely want to use facts and numbers to back them up, not who yells louder. So this is really useful, at least in our team, to avoid potential conflicts and potential negative emotions. And a lot of times you're going to have tough conversations with your team member. So definitely set those expectations before even going to the conversation. For example, if you want to have a very candid feedback with your teammate, you schedule a meeting. You let them know this meeting is about the feedback. And it's about both good and positive feedback and negative feedback. You set those sort of expectations. So when both parties show up at the meetings, they are mentally prepared. And the conversation can be, I would say, as objective as possible, instead of bringing more negative emotions or unnecessary emotions into the meeting. And last but not least is avoid surprises. It's sort of, it's kind of similar to set expectations. But usually people will get very emotional when there is a surprise. For example, if there's a last minute demand, last minute product change, last minute, release date change, these things can set things off. So definitely avoid surprises as much as possible, which means you have to do a lot of work in terms of project management, in terms of how do you manage your product roadmap. But surprises still do happen, So that when surprise do happen, that means you're going back to the third point. You're going to have a tough conversation, and you have to set those expectations for those conversations, so everyone can remain as cool as possible going to the meeting. And last but not least is really just, even with all those, even after removing all those negative emotions, we cannot completely eradicate or remove negative emotions from the team, from the startup completely. So at that point, everyone on the team needs to embrace emotions. Like, it's perfectly normal that someone is going to have a rough day because of work or because of life. It's not avoidable. And it's not like everyone is going to be performing 100% of themselves every single day. So as a manager, you want to sort of avoid immediate feedback. This is sort of like counterintuitive, because when I was at Facebook or when I was at IBM, like, we're always talking about, managers needs to give immediate feedback to their employees. But I think that's not humane, because sometimes, people just maybe having a rough week. So I would suggest giving a sort of delayed feedback, but frequent enough feedback, So you give them you give your peers, you give your engineers a chance to regroup, to get back to their feet. I think that's critical, because if they're having a bad day, if they're not performing well on that day, and you just immediately jumping saying that, hey, your performance is not what I'm expecting, you're just adding, you're just adding oil to the flame, which is not helpful, and it's not healthy to the to the culture you're building. So definitely avoid immediate feedback. Sharing is caring. It's not all about work. You want to always share about your weekends. You want to share about your life outside of work. It's just showing the human side of things. So we all know, like, we're working with humans. We're not working with just another name, another account behind the computer. So that's very important. And this is the last thing, is like a good trick I just found. It's, if you don't really know how to bring emotions to the team, it's just hire students. They are a great catalyst to bond the team together, because once you have students in the team, you know that you have to provide support, you have to provide mentor support, to provide mentorships to those students, and everyone just starts showing a lot of human side of themselves. And it's been very, very helpful, or mentally helpful to our team, and definitely encouraging. If you haven't done so, definitely start hiring students, at least 1 or 2 students on your team. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have. Thank you very much.